So my name is Ray Carveth. I'm one of the folks that helped found the Cannabis Alliance. Keith was just here a minute ago, wherever he went. 4 organizations, when the law was passed, 4 organizations formed business associations for cannabis. They were getting in each other's way. I was asked to come along and see if there wasn't something we could do about that. We spent a weekend at a retreat. At the end of that retreat, they had decided it would be far more impactful to work together and form an alliance to keep forming alliances and connections and networks to make this work better. And that's where the Cannabis Alliance came from. We are looking for networking. We are looking for you to join, if you wish, the Cannabis Alliance. Connect with us somehow. Tell us other places we can connect. The object here is to create a very big table with everybody at it that also provides a lot of power to certain political class. You know, when you want to influence people and you have a lot of people behind you in different organizations, you have more influence. So this is a very new industry according to the state. Of course, at my high school when I was 17, it wasn't a new industry. You may notice I am past 21 by a little ways. Double 36 and you're still a little short. So the bottom line here is this is not obviously a new industry. Cannabis, hemp, whatever, it's been with us for a very long time. Knowing that, think about a law gets changed and many people in this room, especially sitting right back over at that table, have been in this industry a very long time, selling and making products, which weren't legal. In fact, I heard a pretty good story about some woman that was in Wyoming, but we'll tell that later. Or she can. It's a good story. Bottom line is they went from being years and years of stealth and not having anybody know what they were doing to let's be completely open with everything and transparent. That's a big swing. Now, all you have to do is open a business. How many have opened a business in the state or anywhere? You don't just open a business. There's, at least 4 or 5 steps to it. I'm being polite. I mean, anyway, so you're opening a business, you're trying to get financing, you go to a bank and they look at you like you just landed from Mars. And what kind of idiot are you to come into them who are federally regulated and ask them for money for something that's federally illegal? So as that moves forward and all of this changes, I think everybody in this room is in consensus that this will become legal across the country. There's not a lot of choice left to that. It's just a matter of when. So my point is we all need to combine together, help each other, move it forward. And we have some wonderful people here to do that. It's tribal innovation. These individuals are going to introduce themselves. I will tell you that I've talked to some of them, most of them, and have asked a couple to be here. Bottom line is the tribes that work not only within Washington state laws, but because of trust land laws and et cetera, they have a few more hoops to jump through. What we're going to learn today is what they're doing, what they're up to, and how great that is. I will say that THC, their magazine, is wonderful. And you're going to, hopefully you will go to her website. She's going to tell you all about it in a minute. On there is a 63-second message from Representative Holland that encapsulates this perfectly about why hemp and cannabis need to be legal for our communities. So I'm just going to shut up because I can roll on all day. It's just so damn nice to be back in a room where you feel like you belong, isn't it? I got more hugs from that doorway to this stage than I've had in 2 years. So introduce yourself. You are obviously in a group that cares and you're safe. Go for it. Be goofy if you'd like to.
I guess I'm starting. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks to the Cannabis Alliance for inviting and acknowledging the tribal presence and the many tribes in this region and nationally as well. I think most of you probably know me, but in case you don't, my background before I got into the legal cannabis space back in 2016, I worked for Avitas here in Washington and Oregon for a couple of years. I was grateful to their opportunity to get into the space. But before that, I was a chemistry professor. I have a PhD in chemistry from Berkeley. I've done a lot of teaching mostly before this. All the other undergraduate chemistry classes, I think I lectured at least once. And I've been at Medicine Creek Analytics, which is owned by the Puyallup tribe. I think this month is my 4th year. So 2018, I came on that fall, and the Puyallup tribe, I have some notes here so I don't ramble too much. The Puyallup tribe has negotiated a compact with the state, as many tribes have. And I was not a part of that. That was like 2014, 2015. Please don't quote me on that. And they also added a research license option in 2018. And I'm grateful to the state of Washington for having the research license option. It's really critical and underutilized in my opinion, but we can talk about that later. I'm really here to speak just about the lab aspect. The tribe has, as you probably know, a couple of retail stores, access to other license types in the state. So I'm just here to talk about the lab. I don't have any day-to-day input on any of the other aspects of the tribal cannabis enterprises at the Puyallup tribe. But you probably know Medicine Creek Analytics is a third-party testing lab for legal cannabis in Washington state. We've been around since 2016. We've been known for not only being the most expensive lab in the state, but I'm hoping that we've developed to be the best science in the state, and the ability to work with clients on to solve a lot of problems. We do a lot of what I call side projects, which are, helping people understand their product, their grow. Where's that mystery pesticide coming from that you got popped from the WSDA lab? I get calls like that many times a month. Recently the rules changes in Washington state, and the increase in lot size of flower has dropped our sample volume considerably, which is not a great thing. But I also wanted to just take a couple of minutes to chat and summarize about the fundamental research that we were able to get published in 2021. So I have a background in academia. We have another PhD chemist on staff. We hired an undergraduate chemist, newly graduated guy who was great. And we were able to do some fundamental research on measuring heavy metals and aerosols from vaporizer cartridges. And we utilized the Washington State Research License to do that research under. And we published 2 papers. One of them was basically saying we can't use the same methods that people have been using to measure cigarette aerosols. The chemistry is different. Cannabis smoke is different than cigarette smoke. And so we had to actually say, we have to use some different chemistry if we're going to measure things in aerosols that are cannabis based. And then the second paper was our results that we found after actually puffing. We called it smoking weed for science, but it was all done by a machine, I assure you, that collected all of these samples, and we analyzed them. And I'm happy to talk about the results of that work. We were able to get commercially available cartridges under this research license. We had model systems that we set up. And I'm really grateful for the support from the tribe, basically allowing us to do that work alongside all of our other testing work. So that's the innovation I think I'd like to talk about. Our lab bringing, and encourage all of you to come visit the lab. We're always open for tours. I'm happy to chat. I give a lot of free advice away, I gotta say. I've also served on a couple of Washington State task force. And one of the big reasons I got into this industry was years ago, recognizing that we need fundamental science. It's still not there. We need people to lead that, and I hope to continue to be part of that. So I'm also available to do bud tender education or other types of science, cannabis education for your staff or whoever. So let me know, come chat, and I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having us here, and I echo your thanks to considering tribal cannabis. It's maybe not always considered, so thank you for opening up the topic today. My name is Jessie Downs. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Willapa Bay Enterprises. It's the tribal enterprises for Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe down in Pacific County, or in the area of Pacific County. We are based in a town called Tokeland. Yes. But we only got our first retail shop open, well, this summer, actually. And you might wonder why, given all that opportunity, and it really has to do with the tribal context. Our community was, let's say in 2012, not ready for it. So 10 years later, we finally got our shop open, and in Indian country, that's pretty quick, actually. So we feel like we're doing okay. I approach this from a purely economic development perspective because I sit at a higher level working on strategies for all new business development. And we chose to partner with 502 expert Ryan. He's sitting in the audience. Yep, right there. And to accelerate our learning curve. And that's not often done in Indian country. We tend to be very isolated, insular, but we're trying to bring that approach to all of our businesses. So we've done the same with our aquaculture business. We've started an oyster company actually in Willapa Bay. It's prime ground for growing oysters. So I want to give you a little bit of context because to tell our story, it's really about our context. We're in a tiny town, about 200 people. We have very limited economic development options. It's a very poor county. Our environment is very close to sea level. We are very close to sea level. All of our buildings are about 15 feet above sea level. So we're dealing with some bigger issues of relocation. There's very limited infrastructure. And we're also an executive order tribe, which means we have no fishing rights after the Judge Bolt decision. So that limits our economic development options for our people that traditionally went out and fished for their food and their trading, cannot do that. And so when we looked around at our options, this seemed to be a good short-term strategy. So before I was moved over to the business side, I was actually the administrator, and I was the one that saw through the completion of our compact with Washington State. So I also have the government perspective as well as the business perspective. And it's very complicated and it has a huge impact on the business. So I could speak to that as well if there are any questions about that. Sorry, and just looking at my notes. And so why it took us 10 years is because of the cultural appropriateness. And we took our time, we took it slowly, and we had to be very careful with our strategy. And I don't know if is my slide up? It's okay. All right, so if you look up our store or our social media, you'll see that instead of our logo has no elements of cultural art, not one. We took a very modern approach, and instead of partnering with a tribal artist, we found a local artist because we're focusing on creating an authentic brand because we think there's opportunity beyond our retail store being Tokeland Cannabis. We're looking at vertical integration, and that's why I'm here today, really, is to talk about that and the space that needs to be pushed forward to allow businesses to maximize their potential like ours. And that will require some movement in either federal decriminalization or legalization or interstate commerce. And that's really why I'm here today, is to create partnerships or start a conversation about what is needed, because there's a lot of potential to move that conversation forward, specifically in the tribal space. Tribes have, when they come together, a lot of power. And so that's where we're looking at, because we are looking for building our brand beyond our one retail store. And Is it any chance that it's up? Can you see the photos? No, okay. So we're looking at creating an experience in our store, and if the photos were there, you would see a giant bong made out of by a local wood artist, and he made it out of a very large burl, and it's it's outside in front of our store. It's an installation. It's intended to create an interactive experience, but we also have another piece inside the store also created by this artist as well. So yeah, if you go to our social medias, you can see it. We're pretty proud of it. We think it's quite innovative. So we forged those partnerships as a solution to making it comfortable for our community. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions about economic development, that is something I would love to talk about, or about how we can come together to push these issues forward. Thank you. Oh, now they're up? Okay. Okay. So you can see the installation outside and the carving inside. And the one with the carving inside, that's the artist and his father.
I just want to thank our creator for gathering us all here on the homelands of the Native peoples. I want to also thank all of the Cannabis Alliance folks, like the entire fabric that makes up the Alliance, because this is some innovative work, and don't ever sell what you guys do short, because 9 out of 10 times the rest of the nation is watching how you grow, how you develop, how it all plays out, so they can borrow spokes from Washington's wheel in building out their different cannabis operations and development. I'm just saying that from a big picture level. And I know that the case is true also for Indian country. So my name is Mary Jane Oatman. I am the founder of the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition, and that's where you see the THC magazines that are floating around, that we created as the education and advocacy component of our organization. I wear many hats, including this beautiful one that was beaded by my daughter-in-law. But I also serve as the executive director and chief operating officer of a newly formed organization that's headquartered in Wisconsin, formed from Wisconsin tribes. That is the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association. The work that we're doing is definitely captivating Indian country. So before I, kind of dive into all of that a little bit more, I just wanted to share that, some of my early cannabis industry experience on the legal side came from working as a legal bud tender in the I-502, which was great for me because I am a member of the Nez Perce tribe. Our government headquarters is in Idaho, but our usual and custom homelands are in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, with buffalo hunting rights to this day in Montana and Wyoming. So our rights expand a very large geographic territory, but as far as our federal reserve, I mean, we're right there in Idaho, the future mecca of the cannabis industry, as I like to call it. Black gold all over Idaho. But I grew up watering with my dad under the cover of darkness our beautiful flowers, our family's medicine, feeding them, looking over our shoulders all of the time. And we're still doing it in Idaho. That's just what it's like for many of our guerrilla indigenous families across reservations throughout the United States, because we have to just take a step back and realize that while 100% of this nation's cannabis industry flourishes on indigenous homelands, because 100% of it is all indigenous homelands. So 100% of everybody is currently benefiting Indigenous communities are still suffering from the burdens because of it being federally illegal, because our reserves are on federal Indian lands and the feds just get to sit back and pick and choose where and when they want that enforcement to happen. But for those of you that follow the news and saw what happened in the Picarillas Pueblo in New Mexico last year, that farmer just filed suit against the Bureau of Indian Affairs Department of Interior last week for $3.5 million. I think that that's a big eye opener. And one thing that I'm really excited about that is the reason that they're asking for such high damages is because they are claiming that the federal laws for cannabis enforcement are patently racist against Indian people. So I'm knowing that that's going to push the Biden administration a little bit forward in the work that they're doing. But I do what I do because I love this plant. I'm a third generation farmer. I am doing the work that I am with the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition and THC Magazine because I wanted to put my grandma on a magazine. So this is my grandma Jeannie. She's 84 years old and she hates it when I age drop. She's living, thriving. She's still working in the construction industry of all places. But my grandma's dream, she wants her own garden. I want Granny to grow. So she's living there in Idaho, 84 years old. And she went to federal prison when I was a little girl for growing in Idaho. So during that whole DARE campaign era, I'm like, on the weekends going to drive to a federal prison to go see my grandma and then going back and having those, McGruff presentations at school. But the reason that I started this was because of exactly what was being said by Jesse here. The Indian country is always like 10, if not 20 years behind in development, economically speaking, in innovative areas. And this was one of those areas where I was like, oh, hell no, this indigenous plant medicine, it was here before anybody ever invaded. So we have to recapture the dialogue about the healing and the reciprocity that we've had with this plant medicine, specifically indigenous communities. But in my own community, my own tribal community in Idaho, we're not having the conversation. Our tribal elected leaders aren't having the conversation. And the reefer madness that's still going on out there, it's you're going to lose all your federal dollars if you go into cannabis. And so I was hearing and seeing this happen. I'm working as a legal bud tender in Washington State, and I'm serving on the board of directors for the Minority Cannabis Business Association. And I realized even there and those of you that know MCBA, that's some, heavy hitters, some high level folks, and they still needed Tribal Sovereignty Treaties 101. They still needed a high level of education to be able to appropriately advocate for tribes and carry that water forward with legislative initiatives and lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C., but they didn't have the tools. And so in 2019, I formed the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition for the education and advocacy component, as well as to, protect the interests of tribes, and then to slowly but surely gather and convene them, get them networking, get them in the same rooms talking, and not the boogeyman conversation, but like, how do we evolve? How do we grow and develop this? And so the work that I've primarily been doing is in just that, getting our tribal communities together to talk about how our community's relationship with cannabis changes, how it's always been there, how it thrived and survived during prohibition as a subculture, and then now with legalization and this patchwork across Turtle Island. Now, what does that relationship look like? Because our esteemed legislative representative said, it's not going anywhere. It's definitely not going anywhere. So then how do we take the silver lining of that and look at building the data like the Puyallup Nation is? And so I took it upon myself with the Indigenous Cannabis Coalition to start the nation's, the High Times of Indian Country, and it's Tribal Hemp and Cannabis Magazine. So THC Magazine, again, the nation's first and only, lots of issues out there. And I'm just out there stalking tribes, what they're doing in cannabis, telling their stories so that they can be beacons of success and crossroads to successful entry to other tribes so that they can reach out to those tribes, go visit those facilities, and see the nuances of what's working in cannabis economic development, how you can use those benefits to build community. And, one thing that's not happening in Washington state that's happening in other tribal communities across the nation is they realize, oh, wow, we are the business forefront as a tribe, and we want opportunities for our tribal people to be able to have benefit. And so we have models out there where tribes are actually the retail storefront, and they're licensing and permitting the tribal cultivators, and the tribes testing the products or making sure that things are safe, and they have an economic pathway to success for the tribal members. And so there's not enough tribes out there working on cannabis economic development, but those that are doing it at a very high level, they're talking about air sovereignty. They're talking about interstate commerce. It's actually already happening under federal bartering agreements. And so I really saw the opportunity to early and impactful marketing and branding for tribes, because, there's, cookies is, standing out as like the Nike of cannabis, but I really see that it's going to be like one of our indigenous tribes in the United States, because, one thing that I think we can all agree on in this room is that when we were growing up as little kids and we went out into a garden and we took, a piece of fruit or vegetable off of the branch and we ate it, we tasted that authentic vegetable taste. We don't want that happening with cannabis. We don't want Monsanto cannabis where you it smells good, but it doesn't taste good. It doesn't feel good to your body. And so we have a big push as a cannabis community and as Alliance to push back to know your farmer. And that was one thing that was really, really phenomenal for me to get to work in the 502 was to see, and then even shopping now in the 502, to go in from one store to the next, to see which shops are like, oh, I hear this strain and this percentage versus, this is our farms, these are, who we carry, because that's how I shop when I go and I live in Idaho, but all of my retail experiences are in Washington state. I know my farmers, I know my farms. I go in there and I ask specifically which ones are tribally owned and operated. And I can tell you, bud tenders don't know. They don't know which tribally owned and operated companies. And so I would love to partner and work with our tribes to work on elevating those brands of tribally owned and operated, indigenous owned. But before I pass the mic along, there is a little piece of paper on your table. I would love for you to fill that out for a raffle drawing that we're going to do at the end of the day. You'll get copies of all issues of THC Magazine, some other fun swag, our golf balls, and some different things. And then on the back table, copies of the magazine, as well as some handouts for our first annual National Indigenous Cannabis Policy Summit. So I've heard tribes talking about cannabis in Las Vegas. I've heard them talking about it in Southern California, but they're not convening where, the meat of the sausage is built for federal policy legislation. And so I just decided when the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association brought me on board this summer, I told them we're going to go big and we're going to be aggressive and we're going to evangelize tribal cannabis policy. And so we're going to do this in Washington, D.C. And so November 15th and 16th, invite all of you out to come. And as I look in this room, because we are just now, we just launched our membership application 2 weeks ago. And I look at this room and I thought, man, if we just had half of the folks in here join at our base level $420 annual membership, that would just, push us over the top to be able to, continue to build the toolkit work to do our community convenings to help tribes, navigate the complexities. And then most importantly, just continue to protect tribal sovereignty in the impending federal legalization. Canada's Cannabis Act left out First Nations people. They're now going back for a federal review for their big oops. This nation's farm bill left out tribes in the 2014 version. We don't want to see that happening in any kind of legislation. I don't think that that's going to happen, but that's going to take all of us uniting and almost like the surprise birthday party, like 1, 2, 3, surprise, and all shout, protect or at least provide deference to tribal sovereignty and cannabis reform. Hatsiyaya.
My name is Cami Dodd, and I am so delighted to be here and to be on this stage with these amazing women. I am the general manager at 210 Cannabis, which is the Stillaguamish tribe's newest enterprise business. I was very fortunate to be hired on early in the project, so I got to work with their business development team in a lot of aspects of building the dispensary and kind of the motions we had to work through to get to being operational. So we did just have our friends and family event on the 15th of September. We opened the day after. So we are officially operational and the community, yeah, it's very exciting. The community is receiving us very well. It's been special for me to work with the tribal community and to help provide some education and knowledge to our tribal members that there are medicinal benefits and it's not just about getting high and trying to break some of those stereotypes and stigmas. So they do feel comfortable coming into their store and having conversations with the bud tenders and purchasing products that are going to help them to feel better. So I'm dedicated to providing a truly amazing customer experience and having very educated, knowledgeable staff, which is something I think a lot of retailers are lacking. So I'm fortunate to have the opportunity to work with the Stillaguamish tribe. I feel like their ideals and business ethics are very in line with mine. So again, happy to be on the stage here with these ladies and excited to be here.
All right, it's question and answer time. There's one hand. Oh, I know that hand. He's going to ask really in-depth questions. We'll skip him for a moment. Okay. I do want to tell you about the Stillaguamish tribe and Cami. I talked to her. Actually, I talked to the CFO, Eric White, and he explained to me that just one of the issues that they have had. And I want you to understand when you hear how complicated it is, here's a real life example in our community. Stillaguamish built their casino. Things are going fine. They decide to have a cannabis outlet store. All right. Because it's on federal trust land, they can have a casino because you can gamble on federal land. They can't have cannabis because it's illegal federally. But they can have it on other property, but they can't gamble on that property. So what they were told and what they set up was two different organizations completely separated in order to do this. Then they built a beautiful building. You got to admit, that's a beautiful building.
If you haven't stopped by, we're right off exit 210 in Arlington, but it is truly beautiful. As it was mentioned a little bit earlier, not having cultural affiliation in the store, we don't have any obvious cultural affiliation, but we have really beautiful cedar ceilings and river rock on the front of our building. So I'm still paying tribute to some of those things without being too loud about the cultural affiliation.
I've worked with the
beautiful.
Stillaguamish on a couple of other things to help their children. And one of the things that's always impressed me working with tribes is how much their children matter and how much the environment matters. So I'm going to wander back here for that first question.
Ray, I've got a wireless mic. Where was the question?
Oh, there you are.
Hey, Jerry. Here you go, friend.
Do I get to kibitz while you're doing this, Jerry?
No, I'm going to be straightforward.
Good.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jerry Whiting. I'm the founder of LeBlanc C&E. Started out in medical, 502, and now hemp. We are a Seattle-based company that is 100% BIPOC. My partner, Rhiannon, is Flathead, Salish, Montana. I identify as African-American, as the other two people, part of our posse. Right now, we're in the midst of negotiating, coddling, and coaching the Yakima Nation with 9.5, 10 acres of fiber hemp that they have. as the general manager explained to Rhiannon and I, the elders didn't have a destination when they planted this. I've been working with cannabis my whole life, but medical 502 and hemp most recently. The reason my name was passed on was that they want to do, the elders expressed an interest in fiber, not cannabinoids. And I've been working with paper makers around the country the last 3 years. I'm a software guy who retired like a bunch of years ago, and I'm a nerd. So I have a hemp farm I share in New Mexico with the paper maker that I grew up with. I'm part of a farm in Eatonville. Travis is here now, our 3rd year. But the Yakima present an interesting opportunity. I mentioned that I had a software company for years. It's still around. I sold it. I'm the consummate product manager. But when I discuss what to do with this beautiful hemp grow, I run into cultural things. And someone mentioned that 10 years was a reasonable timeline when dealing with indigenous communities. Folks, I come from high tech. Let's do this, I mean, whiteboard and spreadsheet, that's what I did my whole life. So we have good relations. They're happy that we're 100% BIPOC. I do stuff in my backyard and kitchen with fiber that no one else is doing. I have an RFP out for a machine that isn't a decorticator. Pit holes, guidance, inspiration. For those of us who are not of a community, how do we best approach this to mutual benefit? That was short for me.
Thank you.
I would actually love to address that question because I have had the opportunity, and the Yakima Nation is like a sister tribe to the Nez Perce tribe. Our treaty, the Treaty of 1855 for the Yakima Nation, as well as the Nez Perce people, were negotiated at the Walla Walla Treaty Council under Governor Isaac Stevens at the same treaty council. And it has been really interesting because, the Yakima Nation is one of the few tribes where cannabis, high level THC cannabis is still illegal on the reservation.
I can't smoke at work. Is what you're saying. I know.
Yeah,
That's an interest.
Being able to have the conversations with Circle of Elders. I actually did one of our issues on THC magazine specifically on the many ways of consuming cannabis and put smoking at the very end because I wanted them to be able to see that. When I was working within our own tribe, the Nez Perce tribe in Idaho also has a hemp plant approved by the USDA. That took a while to get our tribe to move in that direction. And then after it was passed, then all of the madness started all over again for the people that weren't in the know, that were like, oh, we're opening it up to all this craziness. And so when we had our first town hall public meeting, and that's a big part of it, is just allow the community the opportunity to just gather and just be heard. Gathering to be heard in Indian country is just really, really, really important. But I actually ordered in from Hemp Traders out of California, one of their sample kits of the rope. And they have these little swatches of all of the different blends of hemp fiber materials, and they have their strings and their twines and their fiber boards. You can get these like little sample packs. And so actually getting them tangible products that are made out of fiber in their hands was really, really important. I know that they had talked about how, really making sure that branding just to mainstream, away from the culture, but in the community, having those conversations for the Nez Perce people. Our creation story involves the hemp rope. Our origin story and our spiritual beliefs very much involve it, that there's a hemp rope that comes down from the skies, from the Hanuat, from the creator. And when it starts to expand out, it goes into many different directions, into the different beliefs that everybody has on the lands, but that it goes back up. Our creation story is based around a swallowing monster and the hemp rope. And so the Yakima Nation story is not too far off from ours, and they actually have hemp in their origin story as well. So I think that getting back to the roots in Indian country is really important. And I'm just going to say it, we are still very much suffering in this really like Stockholm syndrome like situation with this government intrusion and everything that's happened with colonization. But this whole boarding school education has opened up a lot of different eyes to conversations about education and how we may have been, you know, all of us been miseducated. Get back into the community, and as often as possible, working with elders of influence is really, really important. Keeping and consistency, because what you had said there earlier about, you know, fast, wanting it to happen. They're used to folks coming in to drop into the community and expect something to happen. And if it doesn't happen overnight and they're not persistent, they're going to bail out. And Indian country's used to that. I mean, we've had a lot of fast and fancy people come through and come out. But this fiber discussion that you're having with tribes, we're talking about healthy home building. We're talking about Indian country actually having the opportunity to unite together and reclaim agricultural sovereignty, land sovereignty. Go to the United States Department of Agriculture and look up the Yakama Nation's land holdings, and then talk to the, you know, the families and the farmers about what that looks like to sever those BIA leases from those, you know, those leasing contracts and get the families back into those farming situations of being able to benefit. So, you know, working with culture and working with the economics, specifically with the Yakama Nation, they got great irrigation systems and
It's the largest irrigated farm of any reservation in the country.
yeah, I've stocked their nation as well. And like my tribe, we have 500,000 acres of agricultural lands, over 500 farmers on our reservation. Only 6 of those farmers are our tribal members. And the rest, I mean, like, I think that it was about 350,000 of those acres are all tribal trust lands that are being leased out by non-Indian farmers for their economic benefit. So this hemp fiber conversation that you're talking about is a game changer. Fiber is really where it's at. We're going to heal with this medicine, but we're going to rebuild this nation with fiber.
Next question over here. You want to give her the mic, please? He's got energy. He can walk. He's not too old.
Thank you. Thank you for walking that over here. And thank you for having such a great conversation. My question is about removing sort of the cultural vibe from your stores. My experience in this industry has been that the removal of my cultural experience, the removal of legacy experience has sort of rebranded cannabis and continues to push forward the difference between criminalized and decriminalized of the same plant. And so my question is, what was the why behind why your stores do not reflect your culture?
Okay, so the first thing to kind of explain about tribes is there's over almost 600 federally recognized tribes. Each one is a sovereign nation with its own culture. So what is true for me is not going to be true for you. Hemp wasn't part of our story, and cannabis wasn't part of our story. We did smoke something traditionally. It was a leaf, and there was some narcotic effect, but not cannabis. So this is a really complicated issue because it's tied up with alcohol, unfortunately, for a lot of people. And so education could do a lot to separate those two issues, like the representative kindly explained and advocated for. It was the only way to get it open without completely upsetting our community. And the thing to keep in mind also in rural areas, economic development is community development. Any little thing you do is going to upset the whole community, tribal and non-tribal. And that is just a reality of our situation. We have survived there together with our non-tribal neighbors since they arrived, really. And the story is very complex and very nuanced in that perspective. And I can tell you from my perspective, it's very personal because my cousin is the head of the cultural department. And luckily, we get on well. It's one of my good cousins. And he
we had a lot of conversations about this one-on-one, and it hit a nerve. It hit too much of a nerve, and it was the only way to get it through, but it was also the authentic way to get it through because it wasn't really a traditional substance for us. And we're going to have to pair that significantly with a lot of education for our youth as well to make sure it's done safely and responsibly. But I would like to, sorry, we moved on to your question very quickly. I would like to plug one thing for sovereignty. There is something called the Hearth Act. And that allows for a tribe to not have their leases approved by the BIA. So if you are looking for a partnership and your tribe or that tribe does not know about the Hearth Act, because a lot of tribes don't, please point them in the right direction, because that actually can accelerate everything. But I just want to, sorry, just to deviate back to or come back to your question. So that was our story, but I would love to hear your story as well.
Similar, and some conversations I was not actually involved in. They were just relayed to me by the cultural team or the cultural department. The Stillaguamish tribe does have a cultural department that I work very closely with, and they really decide how they want the message given to the community. So there were some tribal elders that were very against having a dispensary. They felt like it may send a confusing message to the community when they have designated so many resources to sobriety. So there were elders that were not in support of it. And so kind of the compromise was to not have cultural affiliation within the store. However, at our friends and family event that was for our community and our circle of trust, we were able to have a really amazing blessing. We had singers there, and they were drumming, and we had a sage ceremony. And so in our circle, we are still very much celebrating the tribe, but to the general public, that isn't something that they're wanting to share at this time. And they've said that that might change. That might change. So for me, it's been really interesting to learn how to work with a board of directors. That's very new to me, but it's their store and their story to tell. And I'm just there to be an advocate and help them tell their story. So, yeah.
When you go into the Stillaguamish Tribal Administration Building, which is a gorgeous building built like a huge canoe, you'll see carvings and just beautiful native artwork. When you go into this store, you can tell that it had tribal influence. The use of the woods, the way they played with light in that store, and how you run the store. You walk through that door, there's going to be 3 or 4 people around you. What do you need? If you don't need anything, well, let's talk. You know, I mean, it's very welcoming. So, there's no tribal obvious items in the store, but when you walk through the door where it came from. Next question.
Here.
Did you break it?
There we go. Got it. It just had to be turned on. Sean Dene, Washington Bud Company, and thank you all for being up there. It's great to see a panel of all women in cannabis. So I guess my question is a sensitive one. Obviously, everybody knows in Washington State, we are not vertically integrated, and there's a lot of us that feel that that's really important for our survival. And on the other hand, the tribal compacts, the tribes, from what I understand, can be vertically integrated. You can grow your own, sell it in your own stores, and sell it outside into the regulated market. And we can also sell to you guys. I'm in some of your stores, so thank you very much. But there's a lot of people that feel really threatened by that. The tribes will be able to have people come and consume on site and vertically integrated. So I guess my question is, what message can you give me that I can pass on to help calm the threat of the tribes versus, the 502 people? Does that make sense?
I'll take a stab. So the first is to understand that it's not always easy for tribes to do this. Just because we have one advantage doesn't mean we don't deal with a lot of other barriers. Tribal politics is tough. In 10 years, I'm sorry, sir, it's just that is our timeline. You can't move fast and break things because we're too used to being broken historically. So we're very skeptical of outsiders and things take time. But so for example, you can't consume on site. We have codes that don't allow for that, which we discovered when we opened the store and wanted to have an event, and we had to talk about it with our law enforcement. And yes, that was not changed. And every little change we make, it's going to take time. So we are up against our own barriers tribally as well, not to mention our community too. So we have to move slowly, and we're, those are just our own challenges to bear, and we accept that. The other thing is to look at it as an opportunity as well. I think, for example, like partnering tribes can be a powerful force in advocacy, both at a state and federal level. And for example, on the issue of interstate and commerce, that is something that I've been talking about with people here today already. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do in that space. So I would also encourage people to look for the advantages and CSS allies as well.
Thank you.
I would say that the longer that federal prohibition remains, that the gray areas will only continue to get more gray, which would again create opportunity for businesses in a state like Washington, where you guys are lawfully compacted, the tribes are lawfully compacted, then you're entertaining in this traditional business, tribal business, commerce, and then there's the opportunities for tribes themselves to enter into intertribal compacts with neighboring states like New York, where they're still in quite the mess. And so there I see is a lot of opportunity to work with tribal business industry collectively here in Washington state for the types of movements that you want to see as well, where tribes have the opportunity to go back to the negotiating table with those compacts to bring in the will of all of the Washington cultivators, producers, and businesses. One of those issues rose up around the pandemic, when Department of Health and Welfare's were looking at some different options and opportunities. And we had one of our tribes that built their dispensary with a drive-through. They wanted to open the drive-through. The Department of Health and Welfare wanted to open the drive-through, but the state, again, was the one that was putting their thumb down saying, we're going to shut down your whole cannabis operation. Even though they're a sovereign, they still were facing being shut down by the state because of that compact. But I just see a lot of silver lining again, and just the opportunity to grow and build. And then on the flip side of that, Washington, y'all got it really good. There's states out there where they're dealing with tribes that don't play as nice, where they are completely prohibiting anybody from being permitted to do any cannabis activity on their reservation unless they're doing it under tribal law and authority. So in this situation, it would mean if you're on the Puyallup reservation, you have to have a Puyallup permit, you have to have a state permit, and the Puyallup Cannabis Commission can come and shut you down, and they have full authority to have oversight over your operation, just like the state does. There's some reservations that are out there being a lot more heavy-handed with their cannabis laws as a tribal sovereign. So I would say that that's a really far spectrum of things, but that's in states where they don't have state tribal government to government consultation and relationships like you do here. And so I would say just keep building upon that already effective relationship that you guys have with tribes here to open up business opportunities for yourself under tribal ordinances for taxation and things like that.
One thing I just wanted to mention that I don't think is very well known in the cannabis community. Retail specifically is really competitive. And so some 502 retailers don't necessarily like the tribal stores opening because we do have some tax advantages and we are able to offer more competitive pricing. However, that 37% excise tax that is paid back to the tribe has to be used for specific things. And I know every tribe is different, but the Stillaguamish tribe specifically gives so much back to their communities and does so many amazing things. You know, they donated $300,000 to their local food bank last year. They donate to the Boys and Girls Clubs. They create different educational opportunities for their youth. So the success of these tribal dispensaries truly does help their communities, not just tribal communities, but the communities within, you know, where they're located. So just one bit to also keep in mind.
I have just two really quick things to add. First of all, the Puyallup tribe, my understanding is we follow all of this Washington state rules. And so we're under the same restrictions that everybody is. And secondly, as somebody who grew up in Wisconsin with a family, I'm not Native, if you can't tell, but Native people look very different in different places. I grew up in a family that worked with Native American tribes very closely on a lot of environmental activism. And I've known a lot about, I think a little bit more than your average white person about the mistreatment of tribes over, centuries. And I think allowing tribes to operate in this space is literally the least that we can do.
So in my career, 36 years as an environmental investigator, I worked very closely with some of the tribes here in Puget Sound. And I got to tell you, that was some of the most beneficial things I ever done. Yes. Would you like to ask another question? There you go.
Thank you for being here today. And I echo Sean's appreciation for the all-female panel up there. Dovetailing on the last comment, as I think probably everyone knows, this summer there was an assault on Indigenous sovereignty that came from the Supreme Court. Is there a way that this community can help your community in a broader sense?
Educate yourself is the most powerful tool. Sovereignty at the Supreme Court level has a very long history of being very flippant. They are inconsistent on their judgments and their rulings in this area. And it is you get a little bit of whiplash from watching this all occur. So please educate yourself on what sovereignty is, what tribes are, the differences of tribes. For example, I don't know, do you know what PL 280 tribes are? They're tribes that basically in some ways have been put under the state of Washington. We are not a PL 280 tribe. Educate yourselves on the differences of treaty tribes versus executive order tribes. And I could go on, but these are just some examples. But thank you for the question. That actually gives me a lot of hope. And I look forward to maybe talking later.
Thank you so much for that question. Of course, from my perspective as an advocacy for those two different organizations that I mentioned earlier, join the Indigenous Cannabis Industry Association, pick up the paperback there, scan it for more information about our Tribal Policy Summit. But, buy Indigenous products, support proactive tribal laws just in general. And I would just, what you asked there is, it's just a really profound question, but I realize that not a lot of people are conscious every day that they walk amongst this concrete jungle, that there's Indigenous lands everywhere. And so there's a website out there called nativelands.ca- I can't remember. Oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher it, but you can actually put in a zip code wherever you're at and find out whose indigenous homelands you are. So I think that movement towards land recognition is a big thing, because I mean, our teachers told us a lot of lies. And so just the lack of recognition that indigenous people are vibrant, visible, contributing members of this nation's fabric is an awakening that has happened within the last few years. Us being able to openly talk about how we've faced erasure culture as indigenous communities in a healthy way, I think is supported by people like you asking those questions. So thank you.
You've learned a lot today. You've shared a lot today. I'm going to encourage you to continue to do that with these four wonderful individuals, and I think they deserve a round of appreciation.